As soon as the initiative was finished, they let me go like yesterday's news. They thought removing my name from the files meant they could claim the glory. But they didn't know the most crucial part of the system was with me. A week later, the company started to crumble. I-29F had been working at this mid-sized tech company for 3 years when everything went sideways. The initiative that would eventually become my weapon of revenge started innocently enough, a comprehensive data management system that I'd been developing for 8 months. What my colleagues didn't know was that I'd built something far more sophisticated than they realized. The project began when our CEO announced we needed to streamline our client data across all departments. Sales, marketing, customer service, and finance were all using different systems that barely talked to each other. I volunteered to lead the initiative, thinking it would finally get me the recognition I deserved. I'd been passed over for promotions twice, watching less qualified male colleagues climb the ladder while I did the heavy lifting. I threw myself into the work completely. Nights, weekends, holidays, I lived and breathed this system. I mapped every data flow, identified every inefficiency, and designed something beautiful. The system wasn't just functional, it was elegant. It could predict customer behavior, identify revenue opportunities, and automate processes that were eating up hundreds of hours of manual work each month. My manager seemed supportive throughout the development phase. He'd check in regularly, asking about progress and offering encouragement. The department head also showed interest, occasionally stopping by my desk to see demonstrations of new features. I felt valued, important even. Looking back, I realized they were just keeping tabs on their golden goose. The breakthrough came in month 6 when I cracked the integration problem that had been plaguing similar systems across the industry. I found a way to make all our legacy systems communicate seamlessly without requiring expensive overhauls. It was the kind of innovation that could save the company millions and potentially be licensed to other businesses. I documented everything meticulously, but I kept the core integration protocols in a separate, encrypted file on my personal drive. Call it professional paranoia, but I'd learned to protect my work after having ideas stolen before. As the launch date approached, the atmosphere around the office shifted. Suddenly, senior executives were taking interest in my project. The CTO started attending our weekly meetings. The CEO himself asked for a private demonstration. I walked him through the system's capabilities, watching his eyes light up as he grasped the potential. He asked detailed questions about scalability, implementation costs, and timeline. I answered everything thoroughly, proud of what I'd built. The system went live on a Monday morning in March. Within hours, it was clear we had something special. Customer service response times dropped by 60%. Sales could access real-time customer insights they'd never had before. Marketing could track campaign effectiveness with surgical precision. The finance team was practically giddy about the automated reporting features. By Wednesday, we were getting calls from industry publications wanting to write about our innovation. That's when things started to feel wrong. In the meetings about media coverage, I noticed my name being mentioned less and less. When reporters asked about the technical architect behind the system, my manager would deflect, talking about team efforts and collaborative development. I raised this concern with him privately, and he assured me that individual recognition would come once the initial buzz died down. He said the company preferred to present a unified front during the launch phase. I wanted to believe him, but my instincts were screaming warnings. I started paying closer attention to email chains and meeting invitations. Gradually, I realized I was being excluded from strategic discussions about the system I'd built. When I asked about future development plans, I was told those decisions were being made at a higher level. The system that had been my baby for 8 months was being taken away from me piece by piece. The betrayal became official 3 weeks after launch. My manager called me into his office on a Friday afternoon with an HR representative present. They explained that the company was restructuring, and my position was being eliminated. They thanked me for my contributions to the data initiative, but said my role was no longer needed now that the system was operational. I would receive 2 weeks severance and could clean out my desk immediately. I sat there in stunned silence as they outlined the transition plan. My responsibilities would be distributed among existing team members. The system maintenance would be handled by the IT department. They had everything figured out, except for one crucial detail they didn't know about. Walking to my desk with a cardboard box felt surreal. Colleagues avoided eye contact or offered awkward condolences. A few seemed genuinely surprised by the news, but most acted like they'd seen it coming. I packed my personal items methodically, making sure to grab my encrypted backup drive from its hiding spot behind my monitor. Security watched as I cleared my computer, but they had no idea what I was really taking with me. That weekend, I discovered the full extent of their betrayal. The company had already filed for patents on several aspects of my system design. Press releases were going out crediting the innovative development team, led by my former manager and the department head. My name appeared nowhere in the documentation. 3 years of loyalty, 8 months of intensive work, and they'd erased me completely. But they'd made a critical error. In their rush to claim credit and cut costs, they'd assumed the system was completely self-contained. They thought having access to the user interface and basic code meant they had everything. They were wrong. The integration protocols I'd developed, the real innovation that made everything work, existed only in my encrypted files. What they had was essentially a sophisticated shell. It would function normally for a while, but without the core protocols, it couldn't adapt, scale, or integrate with new systems. I'd built in dependencies they didn't even know existed. I spent the weekend documenting everything I knew about their vulnerabilities. Not just technical weaknesses, but operational blind spots. I knew which clients were most dependent on real-time data. I understood which automated processes were most critical to daily operations. I had insights into their expansion plans and the systems they'd need to integrate in the coming months. Monday morning brought the first signs of trouble. My former colleagues started reaching out with technical questions about the system. They framed it as routine maintenance inquiries, but I could hear the concern in their voices. Something wasn't working as expected. I politely declined to help, citing my separation from the company. By Wednesday, the cracks were showing. The system was generating error reports that their IT team couldn't interpret. Customer service was experiencing intermittent data delays. The automated reporting features were producing inconsistent results. Nothing catastrophic yet, but enough to cause concern among users who'd grown dependent on seamless functionality. I watched from the outside as they scrambled to diagnose problems they didn't understand. Job postings appeared for senior database architects and system integration specialists. They were trying to reverse engineer their own system, but without the foundational protocols, they were essentially trying to rebuild a car while only having access to the steering wheel. The real crisis hit 2 weeks later. A major client integration that should have been routine failed spectacularly. Customer data got corrupted, orders were lost, and their biggest account threatened to cancel their contract. The system that had been their crown jewel was becoming a liability. I received a call from my former manager. He tried to sound casual, asking if I'd consider consulting on some minor technical issues they were experiencing. The desperation in his voice was barely concealed. I told him I was exploring other opportunities and wasn't available for consulting work. He pressed harder, mentioning competitive compensation for my time. I declined again, more firmly. That's when they made their second mistake. Instead of admitting they needed help and offering genuine partnership, they tried to strong-arm me. Legal threats followed, claiming I had violated my employment agreement by withholding proprietary information. They demanded I turn over all files related to the system development. I responded through an attorney, pointing out that the protocols in question were developed using my personal time and resources, predating my employment agreement. Moreover, since they'd terminated my position and removed my name from all project documentation, they'd effectively disclaimed ownership of my contributions. The legal posturing stopped quickly when they realized their position was weak. Meanwhile, their problems were multiplying. The The system's inability to scale was becoming apparent as they tried to onboard new clients. Integration failures were cascading through their operations. Customer complaints were mounting. The media coverage that had once celebrated their innovation was turning skeptical. 3 weeks after my termination, I received an unexpected call. The CEO himself was on the line, his tone completely different from our previous interactions. He acknowledged that mistakes had been made in how my departure was handled. He spoke about the value of my contributions and the company's desire to make things right. He offered me a senior position with significant equity and full credit for my work on the system. I listened politely but declined. I explained that I'd lost trust in the organization and was pursuing other opportunities. He pressed harder, mentioning specific compensation figures that were genuinely impressive. But money wasn't the point anymore. They'd shown their true colors, and I had no interest in helping them recover from their own betrayal. The final blow came a month later. A critical security vulnerability in their modified system was exploited by hackers. Customer data was compromised, regulatory fines were imposed, and their reputation was shattered. The system I'd built with such care had become the instrument of their downfall, not because of any flaw in my original design, but because of their incompetent attempts to modify something they didn't understand. Industry publications that had once praised their innovation were now writing cautionary tales about corporate mismanagement and technical debt. Several key clients terminated their contracts. The stock price plummeted. Layoffs followed as they tried to control costs and rebuild their systems from scratch. I found a position at a competitor within 6 weeks of my termination. My new employer was fascinated by my experience and eager to learn from my former company's mistakes. I was given resources to develop an even more sophisticated system, one that would eventually capture significant market share from my previous employer. 6 months later, I read in the trade press that my former company was being acquired by a larger firm at a fraction of its previous valuation. The acquisition was described as a distressed sale, necessitated by operational failures and client losses. The innovative data system that was supposed to be their competitive advantage had become their albatross. The executives who had orchestrated my removal were among the casualties of the acquisition. My former manager was let go during the integration process. The department head took a position at a smaller firm for significantly less money. The CTO resigned under pressure from the board. They'd all paid the price for their short-sighted greed and betrayal. I never took pleasure in their individual misfortunes, but I felt a deep satisfaction in the vindication. They tried to steal credit for my work and discard me like yesterday's news. Instead, they destroyed themselves through their own incompetence and arrogance. The system they thought they could control without me had become their nemesis. The most ironic part was that the solution to their problems had always been simple: treat people with respect, give credit where it's due, and understand that innovation comes from individuals, not corporate machinery. They'd had a golden opportunity to build something lasting, but they'd chosen the path of exploitation and shortcuts. My new company's system launched 8 months later to industry acclaim. This time, my name was prominently featured in all documentation and press coverage. I received recognition from professional organizations and speaking invitations from industry conferences. The work I was truly proud of finally got the acknowledgement it deserved. Looking back, I realized that their betrayal was actually a gift. It forced me out of a toxic environment and into a situation where my talents were genuinely valued. I learned important lessons about protecting my work and choosing employers who align with my values. Most importantly, I discovered that the best revenge isn't plotting someone's downfall, it's succeeding so completely that their betrayal becomes irrelevant. The company that discarded me like yesterday's news learned that some things can't be stolen or replicated. Innovation requires more than just code and documentation. It requires understanding, vision, and the ability to adapt. They thought they could claim the glory while discarding the architect, but they discovered that buildings collapse when you remove the foundation. Their downfall wasn't the result of sabotage or malicious interference. It was the natural consequence of their own choices and limitations. I simply withdrew my support and let their incompetence run its course. Sometimes the most devastating revenge is just stepping back and letting people face the consequences of their own actions. The industry learned from their failure, and new standards emerged around intellectual property recognition and employee treatment. In a way, their spectacular collapse served a greater purpose, protecting other innovators from similar exploitation. That might be the most satisfying outcome of all, turning their betrayal into a cautionary tale that benefits the entire professional community.